There's a story in the Zhuangzi. That's a Chinese philosophical text from the 4th century BC about an old gardener carrying water from a well to his plots, bucket by bucket. A passing scholar sees this and tells him there's a device for that, a simple contraption that could water in an hour what now takes you all day. The gardener says, "I've heard of it, but whoever relies on such machines grows a machine heart." Now, the gardener in the story isn't afraid of the tool. He's afraid of what happens when a tool starts to shape the way you think. Machine heart means your mind starts copying the logic of the machine, always calculating, always optimizing, and treating the world as something to engineer instead of something to move with. In 2025, MIT researchers strapped EEG sensors to people's heads and asked them to write essays. One group wrote on their own, and one group wrote with an AI assistant open next to them. Then they watched what the brain was doing while the writing happened. In the AI-assisted group, the brain activity dropped, and not just in language areas, but in networks associated with memory, attention, and deeper processing. The writing was faster, but inside the brain, less was firing. In the group that wrote without AI, the opposite happened. Their brains stayed more active while they wrote, and when everyone was later asked to write without AI, that group did better. The people who had carried the work themselves from the start outperformed the ones who had been leaning on the model. And that makes sense, because it's a little bit like going to the gym and building muscle, and then one day someone comes up to you and says, "You know what? You don't have to go to the gym anymore. I'll go for you. That will save you time." And then being surprised that not only are you not building new muscle, but the muscle that you did have starts to deteriorate. Now, the brain isn't exactly a muscle, of course, but it kind of behaves like one. Neurons that fire together wire together, which for the brain means that the connections that get used strengthen, and the ones that don't weaken. That's how the brain physically maintains and develops itself. And the kind of thinking that builds those connections, working through a problem, getting stuck, trying again, finding your own way through, that process cannot be outsourced without cost. An American philosopher by the name of John Dewey spent his life trying to understand how humans actually learn. And he found that genuine learning, the kind that stays and builds judgment and capacity over time, only happens through direct struggle with a real problem. So not through exposure to an answer, or through receiving a summary. It's the struggle itself that does it. So the moment you remove the struggle, you remove the learning. They are not separable. What Dewey described is the exact mechanism that MIT researchers measured a century later. When the AI writes the essay, the struggle disappears. The output exists, but the learning doesn't happen. What the AI-assisted group did is called cognitive offloading. But wait, don't we already use tools? I mean, think of a calculator, right? Cognitive offloading to AI is different from every tool that came before it, because a calculator didn't do the thinking for you. Yes, it computed faster what you had already framed, but you still had to understand the problem well enough to know what to calculate. But what about Google? We've been using search engines for years now. Well, a search engine doesn't think for you either. It retrieves. You still have to read, you still have to evaluate, and you still have to connect the dots. You may choose not to, many of you don't, but skipping that will not necessarily lead to a correct answer, insight, or information. AI doesn't just retrieve, and sometimes it doesn't retrieve at all. What it does do is it replaces the cognitive steps. And those steps, it turns out, were the entire point. Now, if enough of us stop doing the slow, effortful parts of thinking, those parts don't just atrophy in individuals. They thin out at the level of a culture. The skills that feel optional when an AI can always just do it for you are the same skills that keep a society able to remember, to judge, and to change its mind. Remembering doesn't just mean storing facts somewhere in the cloud. It means that enough people can still follow the chain of causes and choices that led to where we are now. And judgment isn't a score an algorithm can give you. It's the slow, human work of weighing motives, trade-offs, and consequences. Changing your mind as an individual person or as a culture only happens when someone can see past the current answer and argue for a different one. If fewer of us practice those moves, the whole system gets more brittle, even when the tools look smarter. Adults who lean too hard on AI risk losing capacities they once had, and children who grow up with it risk never building them at all. You don't just get faster documents. You get a world full of people who are fluent with outputs and shaky on how those outputs were made. The gardener's sphere wasn't abstract. The machine works. The water arrives, the fields get irrigated. Nothing looks wrong. And that is actually part of the problem. Because what's being lost doesn't show up in the output. It shows up later, when you reach for something you used to be able to do and find that you no longer can. We are very good at measuring what AI produces, but we have almost no way of measuring what we lose in the process of letting it. And by the time we truly feel it, it may be too late.